$34. That is all Aria Harper has left in the world, and the eviction notice arrived this morning with 14 days written in bold red letters at the top. $35,000 by November 15th, or her daughter Emma moves into the foster care system, and Aria becomes the kind of mother who loses her child to a landlord's lie. The October wind cuts through Seattle's streets like a blade wrapped in ice, dead leaves skittering across the pavement with sounds like scratching fingers desperate to hold onto something. At 11:47 in the evening, a black Mercedes idles 3 blocks away from the Valenti mansion, its tinted windows concealing a man whose control extends across half the underground economy of this city. Giovanni Valenti sits in the back seat, his breath visible in the cold air, watching through the darkness as his daughter's nanny exits the service entrance. He told Enzo to follow her. 3 blocks behind, no closer. Giovanni leans forward, his jaw tight enough to crack stone, as the woman in the worn grey coat walks past the bus stop without stopping. She walks 6 blocks into neighborhoods where the streetlights have been broken for months. Her thin coat is inadequate against the cold, and she carries a canvas bag so worn the handles are frayed white string. When she enters a condemned apartment building with boarded windows and graffiti bleeding down the brick-like wounds, Giovanni's hands clench into fists. Why would someone who works in his home, who walks his marble hallways every morning, who helps tuck his daughter into sheets that cost more than most people's monthly rent, why would she live there? Enzo texts a single sentence. Building address? No comment. Giovanni stares at the photograph Enzo took 3 seconds before the door closed behind her. The woman's face is turned away, but he can see her shoulders are shaking. Whether from cold or something else, he cannot tell. The man who controls everything is helpless. He watches. He waits. He does not understand this feeling. 3 days earlier, Giovanni found a worn prayer card on the floor of his study. The edges were soft from handling, the laminate yellowed with age. He recognized it immediately because he had buried it with his wife. Maria's card. The prayer card he had placed in her cold hands before the casket closed 7 years ago, before the emptiness that never filled, before he learned that grief and rage are the same thing wearing different masks. Someone had returned it. Giovanni Valenti does not believe in coincidences. 14 days earlier, in the evening hours when the city's working people are already exhausted beyond measure, Aria Harper sat on the edge of her mattress in the condemned building and counted the cash in her coat pocket. The pocket itself had a hole in the seam. She counted slowly, moving each bill to the other pocket as she verified the amount. $1. $2. $5. $10. By the time she reached 34, her hands were shaking. $34. It had to last until Friday. For days. Emma needed new shoes, the one she wore had a hole in the sole and Aria had stuffed newspaper inside to keep her daughter's feet dry. The electricity bill was 3 weeks past due. The landlord, Douglas Hale, a man with cold eyes and a habit of smiling when he delivered bad news, had been collecting late fees for 8 months straight. Aria worked double shifts as a maid at the Valenti mansion, cleaning rooms she could never afford to sleep in, making beds worth more than her annual salary, and the money never stretched far enough. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere between the night Emma's father left and the morning Aria realized she would be doing this alone. The eviction notice sat on the small table beside their mattress. She had read it 17 times, and 17 times the words remained exactly the same. $35,000. Or out by November 15th. The letter was signed by Douglas Hale, property manager, written in the kind of formal language that made cruelty sound like business. Emma was 6 years old and already knew not to ask for things. That evening, Emma sat beside her mother on the mattress, her small body outlined against the thin blanket they shared. The child wore 3 layers of clothing despite the apartment being relatively warm. Old habits from colder months die hard. "Mama, are we moving?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aria pulled her daughter close. "No, baby. We are staying right here." It was a lie. Aria was becoming very good at lying. "I like it here," Emma said, which was not true. No child likes a condemned building where the windows are boarded and the hallway smells like things that should not exist. Colors for sad days, Emma continued, holding up a piece of construction paper covered in bright marker. Blues and yellows and reds all pressed together. When you feel sad, look at this. Aria took the drawing and held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. Because it was. Because her daughter had made it knowing her mother was falling apart and had tried to fix it with markers and paper. Because sometimes one small hand reaching out at exactly the right moment can change an entire life, and sometimes it cannot change anything at all, and you have to love the child anyway. The next morning, Aria took the bus to the Valenti mansion. 40 minutes on public transportation from the condemned apartment building to the gates of a house so large it had its own security team. She had worked there for 2 years as part of the cleaning staff, invisible to most of the household, noticed only when something was dirty or out of place. She was the kind of woman people looked through rather than at. The mansion sat on 7 acres of landscaped grounds. The driveway alone was longer than the entire apartment building where she lived. When she arrived at 6 in the morning, the sky was still dark, and she used her key card to enter through the service entrance. The morning routine was always the same. Dust the bedrooms. Change the linens. Clean the bathrooms. By the time the household woke, she was supposed to be invisible. But on this morning, something was different. Giovanni Valenti stood in the kitchen when she entered, still wearing the suit from the night before, looking like a man who had not slept. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of a winter storm. A scar ran from his left eye to his jaw, a thin white line that made him look dangerous even when his expression was neutral. He wore a white shirt open at the throat, and his wrists were heavy with gold, a watch that cost more than Aria's annual salary, and rings on 3 fingers. His men stood behind him. 2 of them, both tall, both dressed in black suits that screamed violence. "You are the nanny," Giovanni said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, and it carried the weight of a man accustomed to obedience. "Yes, sir," Aria said. Her voice came out small, the voice of someone accustomed to taking up as little space as possible. "My daughter asks for you." "Not her mother." "You." Aria did not know what to say to this. She had been hired to care for Isabella, Giovanni's 7-year-old daughter, for 3 hours each evening. The child's mother had left 2 years ago and never returned. Isabella was a quiet child with sad eyes and a habit of drawing pictures of people holding hands. "I do my best to care for her," Aria said carefully. Giovanni studied her for a long moment. Then he turned away. "Continue," he said, and the conversation ended because when Giovanni Valenti ended a conversation, it ended. The men left. Aria stood alone in the kitchen and realized her hands were shaking. She did not know that he had already made a decision about her. She did not know that in 48 hours, her life would splinter in a way that could never be put back together. Outside the mansion gates, in the Seattle darkness where the city's underground economy conducted its business in whispers and shadows, a man named Douglas Hale was making his own plans. He sat in a restaurant called Domenico's, the kind of place where the owner did not ask questions and the waiters wore expressions of profound indifference. Across the table from him sat a woman named Catherine Mercer, wealthy by birth, cruel by choice, dressed in clothes so expensive they looked fragile. "The Harper woman," Catherine said, stirring her wine with one long finger. "She is becoming a problem." Douglas smiled. "She knows too much." What neither of them knew was that someone had heard this conversation. Someone was always listening in the darkness. And Giovanni Valenti would know the name Douglas Hale before the sun rose again. The rain began to fall around midnight, and in the condemned apartment building, Aria held her daughter and listened to the water dripping into a bucket on the floor. The sound was like a clock counting down the days until November 15th. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us dive deeper into what happens when desperation meets power and when one man begins asking dangerous questions about a woman he cannot stop watching. The rain had not yet come, but the October air carried the promise of it. Aria Harper stood at the kitchen counter of her condemned apartment at 6 in the morning, counting coins into a pile that looked obscene in its smallness. $34. Quarters and dimes and pennies she had scraped from the bottoms of coat pockets, from between the sofa cushions, from the loose change jar she kept hidden behind the flour canister. $34 to last until the first of the month, which was still 17 days away. Beside the coin sat the eviction notice, its edges already curled from handling. The paper was thin and official and catastrophic. Vacate in 14 days. Back rent owed, $35,000. But the rent was paid. She had paid it every month without fail, money withdrawn from her checking account 2 weeks late each time, but paid. She had overheard her landlord, Mr. Chenoweth, on the phone 3 days ago. His voice rough and satisfied as he spoke to someone about clearing out the building, about developers waiting, about how to make tenants leave without technically breaking the law. Aria Harper was simply inconvenient. In the bedroom, Emma slept with her stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest. 6 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that tangled when she slept and a way of breathing that sounded like a whisper. Aria stood in the doorway and memorized her daughter's face. Not because she was planning to leave, but because she was terrified she might have to. The walk to Riverside Elementary took 45 minutes. Aria and Emma moved through the cold morning streets of Seattle, past the coffee shops that were already filling with people who did not count coins, who did not stand at counters trying to make numbers work that simply refused to work. The October air cut like a blade wrapped in ice. Aria's breath came visible and white, and Emma's small hand gripped her mother's with the total dependence of childhood. "Mommy, why are your hands always so cold?" Emma asked this without looking up, focused on the concrete beneath her shoes, on not stepping on the cracks. Aria looked down at her daughter's face. At the sincerity there. At the way children asked questions that broke your heart because they deserved real answers and you could not give them any. "Because I give all my warmth to you, baby," Aria said. "That is what mothers do." Emma considered this as if it were mathematics that needed solving. "Then who gives warmth to you?" Aria did not answer. She adjusted the plastic bag of second-hand textbooks she carried in her other hand, books from Goodwill that had cost $3 total, that Emma would need for the fall reading program at school. The bag cut into her palm. Everything cut into her palms these days. The school stood red and solid against the morning gray. Aria knelt down and straightened Emma's collar, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and watched her daughter disappear into the building where Mrs. Patterson, the teacher, would be kind to her. Where Emma would learn things. Where she would be safe and warm for 7 hours. Then Aria turned and walked away. The first job was at the Valenti mansion in the Magnolia district. She arrived at 7:30, and the house rose before her like something from a different world entirely. 3 stories. Pale stone. Windows that cost more than everything she owned. A fountain in the front courtyard where water moved in arcs so perfect they looked rehearsed. A man named Enzo met her at the service entrance. Early 40s, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to be always calculating distance and threat. He did not speak to her beyond the necessities. Few people did. Aria cleaned. She dusted the shelves in the library where books sat with unbroken spines. She vacuumed the sitting room where no one seemed to ever sit. She emptied waste baskets and replaced them with clean liners. She moved through the house like a ghost, like the kind of person who existed in the spaces between other people's lives. By noon, her back ached. By 2, her feet had begun to blister inside her shoes. At 3 o'clock, she took the bus across the city to Riverside Hospital, where she worked as an aide in the cancer ward. She changed into scrubs that had been washed so many times they were thin as cloth could be. She helped patients into bed and out of bed and helped them to the bathroom and helped them die, sometimes. She helped them die with as much dignity as the body would allow. A woman named Mrs. Chen lay in room 417. 73 years old. The cancer had moved to her bones. Mrs. Chen asked Aria, every time Aria came to change her linens, "How old are your children?" And Aria said, "I have a daughter, Emma, she is 6, and Mrs. Chen smiled the way people smile when they are saying goodbye to the world in their heads, piece by piece. You should get her everything she wants, Mrs. Chen said on that Thursday, October 14th. Do not wait. Do not save it for later. Give it to her now while she can still remember that you were the one who gave it to her. Aria smoothed the blanket across Mrs. Chen's legs. I am doing the best I can. I know you are, Mrs. Chen said, and her eyes glistened. That is what breaks my heart. The shift ended at 10. Aria had worked 16 hours. She had earned $80, though she would not see that money until Friday. She caught the late bus downtown, getting off 3 blocks from the medical building she cleaned every night. Her knees ached. Her hands had begun to crack from the chemicals. The October wind had picked up, and she walked with her coat pulled tight around her, thinking about Emma sleeping in the dark, thinking about the eviction notice, thinking about how there was not enough arithmetic in the world to make this equation balance. The medical building was quiet at 11:30. Security nodded to her without really seeing her. She had become invisible here, and invisibility had its uses. She moved through the offices on the 4th floor, emptying trash cans, replacing them with fresh liners, wiping down the desks of doctors and lawyers and people who helped other people solve their problems. Behind a trash can near the window of a law office, Aria found a wallet. It was leather, expensive leather, the kind that cost more than she made in a month. Inside, $300 in crisp bills sat next to credit cards and a driver's license. The photograph on the license showed a man in his early 40s, dark-haired, with eyes that seemed to be looking past the camera into something dangerous. Giovanni Valenti, the card read. The same name that was embroidered on the gate of the mansion where she cleaned. Guilt hit her like a fist. She needed that money. She needed it with a desperation that was almost physical, a hunger that sat in her chest like an animal trying to claw its way out. $300 would buy her breathing room. $300 would mean groceries and bus fare and time. $300 was the difference between Emma staying and Emma being taken into foster care. Aria sat down on the carpet and cried. It took her 20 minutes to decide. She put the $300 back into the wallet. She left it on the desk of the law office with a note that read, "Found this in the hallway." She left it because she was her mother's daughter, and her mother had raised her to be honest even when honesty cost everything. But as she cleaned the rest of the office, something caught her eye. A small card had fallen from the wallet, separate from the others. It was a prayer card, the kind that was sold in church gift shops. The image showed Mary, Mother of Jesus, holding a child. The back of the card was worn from handling, the words faded to almost nothing. Aria turned it over and read, "For my Maria, who taught me that love is the only power that matters. Always, G." She thought about putting it back in the wallet. Instead, she slipped it into her pocket. She did not know why. She did not know that this single act of theft, this one small prayer card, would become the thread that unraveled everything. Down in the building's security office, hidden away in the basement, a guard named Marcus watched the footage from the 4th floor. He watched a woman in a cleaning uniform find the wallet. He watched her cry. He watched her put the money back. And then he picked up his radio and called the number he had been given, the number for a man named Enzo. "The wallet is back," Marcus said. "The cash is back." "But—" Enzo's voice came through the speaker, steady as a heartbeat. "But the prayer card." She took the prayer card. There was a pause, the kind of pause that held its breath. She took Maria's prayer card, Enzo repeated, and now something dangerous had entered his voice. "You are certain?" I watched her put it in her pocket. Enzo hung up without saying goodbye, because in Enzo's world, phones disconnected when the conversation was over. He stood in the kitchen of the Valenti mansion, where Giovanni sat at the counter with a glass of water and an expression of absolute stillness. Enzo told him what the security guard had reported. He told him about the woman who had cleaned the house twice this week. He told him about the prayer card. Giovanni did not move. He did not speak. He simply turned away and walked to his office, and Enzo knew that something had shifted in the air. He knew, because he had worked for Giovanni for 15 years, that the woman who had taken Maria's prayer card had just become the most important person in Seattle, whether she knew it or not. Aria arrived home at 1 in the morning. The apartment was cold, the heating system failing like everything else in the building. She checked on Emma, who slept with her rabbit and one arm thrown across the pillow as if she were waving at someone in a dream. Aria lay down on the sofa, still in her clothes, and she held the prayer card in her hand and read the words over and over until she understood. Someone had loved someone so much that they had carried their name in their pocket. Someone had believed that love was the only power that mattered. Someone had been that desperate to hold on to another person. Aria understood that feeling. She would have understood it anywhere, but she understood it especially now, lying in the cold darkness, with 2 weeks until eviction and $34 in her pocket and a daughter sleeping in the next room who might be taken from her forever. She pressed the prayer card against her chest and fell asleep like that, holding on to something that belonged to someone else, holding on to the belief that sometimes love could move heaven, could change the trajectory of a life, could reach into darkness and find you there. What she did not know was that she had just activated a surveillance system that would follow her every movement. What she did not know was that Giovanni Valenti would spend the entire next day watching footage of her walking through the city, moving from job to job, from one small exhaustion to another, all while holding his wife's prayer card in a pocket worn through from washing. What she did not know was that his men had already begun asking questions about her. Questions about where she lived, who her daughter was, what it would take to help her disappear. And what she did not know was that by doing the right thing in returning the wallet, by taking only the one small prayer card, she had shown Giovanni Valenti something he thought he would never see again, evidence that goodness existed somewhere in the world. The October wind cuts through Seattle like a blade wrapped in ice, and Aria Harper stands outside a clinic on 5th Avenue counting the crumpled bills in her pocket for the 3rd time that day. $34. The number doesn't change, no matter how many times her trembling fingers sort through the worn paper. $34 and 14 days left before the eviction becomes real, before Emma, her 6-year-old daughter with dark eyes that mirror her own, gets taken away by a system that doesn't care about desperate mothers and false claims and landlords who see money signs instead of people. She walks home through the rain, her coat thin enough that she can feel every cold drop, and she doesn't notice the black sedan following 3 car lengths behind. Doesn't know that inside that car, a man named Giovanni Valenti is watching her on a live feed from one of his security cameras, watching her walk from the clinic to the bus stop to the convenience store where she buys a single can of soup for 90 cents, watching her move through the city like she's trying to be invisible. For days earlier, Aria had found a leather wallet on the street outside the Pike Place market. The wallet held $300 in cash. It held credit cards. It held a photograph of a woman with Giovanni's exact eyes, dark, haunted, beautiful even in her sadness. And it held a prayer card, worn soft from handling, the edges curled from years in a pocket. The prayer card read, "Maria Valenti, beloved wife, may you find peace in whatever comes next." Aria had kept the prayer card. She had returned everything else, placing the wallet on the hood of a black SUV parked outside the market, hoping its owner would find it. But the prayer card she had kept, because something about holding someone else's prayer, someone else's desperate hope for another person, felt like holding something sacred. She had carried it in her own pocket, reading it at night while she lay on a second-hand sofa, still in her work clothes from the diner shift, the nanny job, the hotel housekeeping that paid minimum wage and came with tips nobody left anymore. What Aria did not know was that returning that wallet had set off a chain of events that would rearrange every single thing in her life. Giovanni Valenti sat in his office on the 42nd floor of a building that bore no name, behind a desk so massive it required 2 men to move it, and he held the prayer card in his hands like it was made of glass. The card was impossible. The card was a message from beyond the grave. His wife Maria had carried this card every single day of their marriage, had clutched it when his enemies came, had prayed on it when their child was born, had died holding it in her hand while he stood outside the hospital room because he couldn't go in, couldn't face what his choices had cost her. Someone had returned his wallet. Someone had taken only this one small thing. Find her, he told Enzo, his most trusted lieutenant, a man with silver threading his dark hair and a scar running down the left side of his neck like a permanent reminder of the loyalty that cost. Find the woman in the market footage. The one who touched the wallet. I want to know everything. Where she lives. Who she is. Why she took Maria's card. Enzo nodded and left without asking questions. In 22 years of working for Giovanni, he had learned that questions got you killed, but loyalty got you legendary. He had also learned that Giovanni didn't ask for people to be found unless something had shifted inside him, unless something had cracked in the armor he had built around his heart after Maria died. It took Enzo 6 hours to identify Aria Harper. 6 hours of pulling footage, cross-referencing faces, hacking into the city's residential database. When he had the information, he brought it to Giovanni's office at 3:41 in the morning, because Giovanni didn't sleep anymore, hadn't slept through a full night in the 2 years since Maria's death. Her name is Aria Harper, Enzo said, placing a file on the desk. 28 years old. Works 3 jobs, night shift at Mercer's Diner, nanny position with the Castelliano family, housekeeping at the Cascade Hotel. She lives in a condemned building on 5th and Marion. She has a daughter, age 6. Emma Harper. Father unknown or absent. Giovanni opened the file and saw her face in security footage, grainy but unmistakable. She was thin in a way that spoke of rationing, of choosing between food and electricity. Her hair was dark and long, pulled back in a way that showed the sharp angles of her face, the hollows under her cheekbones. But her eyes, even in the low-quality footage, her eyes held something intact, something that hadn't been destroyed yet. Why would she return a wallet with $300 and take only a prayer card? Giovanni asked, his voice like thunder, like an oath that couldn't be broken. Enzo shifted his weight. I don't know, boss. Maybe she's religious. Maybe she saw the name and thought. No one is that good, Giovanni interrupted. No one returns money and takes nothing. There's always a reason. There's always a want. Find it. But even as he said the words, something moved in his chest, something that felt like ice beginning to crack. His wife had believed in goodness. His wife had believed that even in a world of violence and blood and broken bones, there were people who still chose mercy. He had spent 2 years proving her wrong, proving that the world was nothing but teeth and hunger and betrayal. Now a stranger had returned his wallet, had kept only the prayer card his dead wife had carried, and Giovanni couldn't explain why that small action felt like the first kindness he had witnessed in 2 decades. The next morning, Aria received a call from a number she didn't recognize. A woman's voice, crisp and professional, offered her a job. A position as a live-in nanny to a 7-year-old girl named Sophia. Room and board included. Immediate start. The salary was 3 times what she made at all 3 other jobs combined. Aria said yes before the woman even finished explaining the terms. She didn't know that Giovanni Valenti had instructed Enzo to hire her, to bring her into his world so he could understand why she had kept his wife's prayer card. She didn't know that when she walked through the gates of his mansion, a structure of marble and shadow that took her breath away, she was walking into a trap designed not to catch her, but to study her, to unlock the mystery of her goodness the way a scientist studies an impossible organism. What Aria also didn't know was that Catherine Mercer had been watching her, had noted her desperation with the accuracy of a predator identifying wounded prey, and had decided that the girl was perfect for the network. Vulnerable. Alone. Motivated by love for her daughter to consider anything, absolutely anything, to save Emma from foster care. Douglas Hale knew it too. He could smell desperation like dogs smell blood, and when he saw Aria Harper's photograph in the intelligence report, when he learned that she worked at Mercer's Diner where he collected money from the owner, he smiled. This one would be easy. This one would do anything. Meanwhile, Giovanni stood in his office, watching the security feed of Aria walking through his mansion for the first time, watching her eyes widen at the chandeliers, the marble floors so polished she could see her reflection in them like a ghost. She held herself small, trying not to take up space, trying to disappear into the expensive furniture and the weight of so much money and power concentrated in one place. When Enzo brought her in to meet him, Giovanni was sitting behind his desk, deliberately staged, deliberately in control. The scar above his left eyebrow caught the light. His hands rested on the desktop, palms down, showing the silver rings, the rings of a man who had broken other men's hands and lived to wear the story. "You will care for my daughter Sophia," he said, his voice steady and cold. "She does not leave the property without Enzo or Nino present. You do not ask questions about my business or my work. You do not speak to anyone about this house. You do not tell anyone where you are. Understood?" Aria nodded, and her hands shook slightly. "Why did you return my wallet?" Giovanni asked, the question landing like a stone dropped into still water. Aria's face went pale. I thought it was the right thing." "You took something from it." "I found the prayer card separately," she said quickly, her voice barely a whisper. "It was on the ground near the wallet. I thought it was trash, but the name, and the words on it, I didn't know what to do with it, so I kept it, and I'm sorry, I can return it right now, Giovanni raised one hand, and she fell silent. He studied her for a long moment, and in that moment, something shifted in his chest, something that felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. "Keep it," he said finally. "For now." Aria started work the next day. Sophia was lonely in a way that broke Aria's heart, a 7-year-old girl with her father's dark eyes and her dead mother's delicate hands, a child who had everything except what mattered, someone to love her, someone present, someone real. Aria read to her in the library. They baked cookies in the commercial kitchen. They played hide-and-seek in the hallways while armed guards watched from every corner. "Do you have children?" Sophia asked one afternoon, holding a book against her chest. "I have a daughter," Aria said. "Her name is Emma. She's 6 years old." Sophia's eyes widened with a hunger that made Aria's throat tight. "Does she live here?" "No, sweetheart. She lives with me in our apartment. But she goes to school during the day, and I work, and we see each other every night." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, very seriously, "Colors for sad days. When she feels sad, look at this," and she pushed a drawing toward Aria, a picture of a sun surrounded by flowers, all done in bright yellow and purple crayon. Aria took the drawing and something broke inside her, something that had been holding together only through sheer will. This child, this lonely girl in a mansion full of guards, wanted to make something beautiful for another child she would never meet, wanted to give away color to someone far away who might be sad. That night, Giovanni found her in the library, and she was crying. She held the drawing in her lap, and tears ran down her face silently, the way crying happens when you've already exhausted all your noise and fury and are left with only the pure physical fact of your own breaking. Giovanni didn't say anything at first. He just sat in the chair across from her and let her cry, and then he said very quietly, "Tell me." Aria couldn't stop herself. The words came out like water through a broken dam. She told him about the eviction, about the false claim, about the $35,000 she had to produce in 14 days or Emma would be taken away. She told him about working 3 jobs and still falling short, about the way poverty was a mathematical problem with no solution, about coming home some mornings and falling asleep on the kitchen floor because she was too tired to move to the sofa. She told him about Catherine Mercer's card, the one still in her pocket, the job that paid too much money for work that felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. Giovanni listened to all of it, and when she finished, he stood and walked to the window. The city lights spread out below them, all that power and money and human desperation concentrated in one landscape. "Why would anyone help me?" Aria said to his back. "I'm nobody." Giovanni turned around, and his expression had shifted into something that looked like pain, like old wounds being reopened. "You are not nobody. You returned my wallet when you had nothing. You kept only a prayer card. You are helping my daughter when you're barely keeping yourself alive. That makes you the only somebody I've met in 2 years." He sat back down, and for the first time in a decade, Giovanni Valenti cried in front of another person. Enzo, standing in the shadows by the doorway watching security monitors, saw it happen and froze in absolute shock. In 22 years, he had never seen his boss show any emotion beyond rage or cold calculation. Now he was crying, silently, while a thin woman in a worn coat held a child's drawing and looked at him like he had just rewritten the meaning of her life. What neither of them knew was that Douglas Hale had followed Aria to the mansion, had photographed her walking through the gates, had sent the images to Catherine Mercer with a message, "She's with Valenti now. She's protected." But protection can be broken. What neither of them knew was that in 4 days, when Aria still owed $35,000 with nowhere left to turn, Catherine would show up at the mansion with a new offer, one that didn't sound like trafficking, one that sounded like salvation. What neither of them knew was that everything they were building, this fragile thing between them, this belief that goodness could survive in a violent world, was about to be tested in ways that would require Giovanni to choose between everything he had built and the one person who made him remember why he wanted to be anything other than a monster. The rain outside began to fall harder, drumming against the mansion's windows like an old song, like a warning, like the sound of a clock counting down to a moment that would change everything forever. The October wind tore through Seattle's streets like a blade wrapped in ice, and Aria Harper's vision blurred as she hit the brick wall behind her. Douglas Hale's hand, thick and merciless, pressed against her throat with the casual cruelty of a man who believed consequences were for other people. Her fingernails clawed at his grip, her lungs burning, her one good eye widening in pure animal terror as his fist came at her face, once, twice, and the world exploded into white pain. Her eye swelled shut in seconds. Handprint bruises bloomed across her throat like flowers of violence, dark purple against her pale skin. Douglas hurled her to the concrete with the force of a man throwing out garbage. She crashed hard, the wind knocked from her chest, her ribs screaming in protest. Catherine Mercer watched from the idling car, smoking a cigarette with the detached interest of someone observing a minor inconvenience. She did not move. She did not react. She simply exhaled smoke and waited. Douglas leaned down, his shadow swallowing what little light remained. His voice was venom in a human shape. "You think Valenti will save you? He doesn't care about trash like you. 24 hours, Aria. You report to our facility, or Emma disappears into the system. We have people in CPS. We own people everywhere." He spit, the glob landing near her face. "We own everything." Then they were gone. The car pulled away into the darkness, leaving only the sound of the engine fading and the rain beginning to fall in cold, needless sheets. Aria lay on the pavement for a time she could not measure. Minutes or hours. The rain soaked through her coat, through her clothes, through her to the bone. Her body shook, not from cold alone, but from the knowledge settling into her like a stone. This was how it ended. Not with salvation. Not with escape. With this. With blood and rain and the certainty that she had failed the only person who mattered. Emma. Her daughter's name was a prayer she no longer believed would be answered. Aria's hands trembled as she reached into her pocket, her movements mechanical, broken. Her phone was there, cracked screen barely functional. She could call 911. She could call Giovanni. But what would she say? That she was destroyed? That she was nothing? That she had brought danger to the only person who had shown her kindness in 2 years? Her fingers found something else, the prayer card, Maria's card, damp but still intact. "Blessed are the merciful." The words blurred by rain and tears and her own blood. She held it like a talisman, like evidence that goodness had once existed in this world, even if it no longer did. She dragged herself to her feet. Every movement sent lightning through her ribs. Her balance was gone, her vision halved. But her legs carried her forward, one foot in front of the other, toward the only sanctuary she had ever known. Toward him. The service entrance of Giovanni's mansion rose before her at 1:33 in the morning like a fortress, like a prayer answered by a god she had stopped believing in. Aria's fists came down on the door, weak and desperate. She was going to collapse. She could feel it happening, her body beginning its final surrender. The door opened. A guard saw her and his face went stone. one eye swollen shut. Handprints on her throat. Blood mixing with rain on her skin. He moved fast, radio already in his hand. Security to the boss. Now. Giovanni arrived in 60 seconds. Enzo and Nino flanked him, both men moving in formation, all threat and readiness. But when Giovanni saw her, when he saw what they had done to her, something shifted in his face. The controlled expression cracked like ice in spring thaw. His jaw tightened. His eyes went blank, and in that blankness lived something that made even his own men step back. He knelt beside her, his expensive suit pressing against the wet pavement. His hand, the one that had ordered violence 1,000 times without flinching, reached out to touch her face with a gentleness that looked like betrayal of everything he was. Who did this? Aria's voice was shattered glass. Douglas Hale. Catherine Mercer. They said Emma. She collapsed. Giovanni caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her like she weighed nothing, carrying her inside with Enzo and Nino scrambling to clear a path. Get Dr. Ricky here. Now. His voice was ice. Lock down the building. Full security protocol. Boss, Enzo began. Find Douglas Hale and Catherine Mercer. I want locations in 10 minutes. And get me Marco DeLuca. The silence that followed was profound. Enzo's blood drained from his face. In 5 years of war, Giovanni Valenti had never once reached out to the rival family. Not once. To call Marco DeLuca was to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. You heard me. Giovanni carried Aria to his private study, laid her carefully on the leather sofa that cost more than she would earn in her lifetime. Dr. Ricky arrived within 12 minutes, a woman in her 60s with steady hands and no questions. She examined Aria in silence, cleaning wounds, checking for fractures, her expression growing darker with each discovery. Broken ribs. Possible fracture in the orbital socket. Whoever did this meant to destroy her. Dr. Ricky looked at Giovanni. She's lucky. An inch deeper and he would have crushed her windpipe. Lucky. The word sat wrong in the room, an obscenity. Giovanni made the call at 2:15 in the morning. He stood by the window, the city stretched below him, indifferent to his rage. Marco DeLuca answered on the third ring, his voice rough with sleep and annoyance. Valenti. This better be worth waking me up. Douglas Hale has been trafficking women through your docks for 6 months. He's been skimming your profits, selling to competitors. Catherine Mercer has been funding him with money laundered from your casinos. I'm sending you proof. Silence. Then, slower, why would you call me with this? Because they hurt someone under my protection. And because you'll do things I can't afford to be connected to. Another silence. This one felt like a door opening into a darker room. Done, Marco said finally. They're yours. They're yours, Giovanni corrected. I just wanted you to know where to find them. At 4:33 in the morning, 12 men dressed in black moved through Seattle like ghosts. No sirens. No announcement. Just swift, efficient violence in the dark. Douglas Hale was dragged from his apartment at 4:17 a.m., kicking and screaming, his expensive sheets torn in his panicked scrambling. 4 men pinned him to the hardwood floor. He was still fighting, still believing that money or connections or some last-minute negotiation would save him. Until he saw Marco DeLuca step from the shadows. Douglas's face went white. The fight drained from him like blood from a corpse. No. No, please. I'll give you anything. I'll pay you. I'll give you. You've been stealing from me, Marco said, his voice carrying the weight of 5 centuries of Sicilian tradition. That's a death sentence. But Valenti asked me to make it slow. Douglas was dragged screaming into a black SUV. The door closed. The vehicle disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Catherine Mercer's destruction came in daylight, which somehow made it worse. At 6:06 a.m., FBI agents raided her estate with the theatrical precision of a performance designed for cameras. Catherine was arrested in her silk robe, her hair still wet from the shower she had taken while Douglas's screams were still echoing in warehouse basements across the city. She was arrested while photographers flashed and reporters shouted questions and her entire world crumbled on live television. Mrs. Mercer, sources indicate you've been operating a human trafficking network for 8 years. Do you deny the allegations? Catherine's composure shattered like the expensive china she had collected. Her face twisted into something inhuman. I am a philanthropist. This is a complete mistake. My lawyers will. We have financial records, witness testimony, communications linking you directly to Douglas Hale's operations. You're facing federal charges under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. 40 years minimum. The words landed like executioner's blades. 40 years. No parole. No reduction. No mercy. Her charity foundation was exposed as a front within hours. Her socialite friends abandoned her with the speed of rats leaving a sinking ship. Her assets were frozen. Her name became synonymous with corruption, with the darkness hiding beneath wealth and status. The footage played on every news channel. The story spread like wildfire through social media, 500,000 views within 1 hour, 2 million by morning, every news outlet in the country running headlines about the philanthropist who had been a predator all along. She would spend 40 years in federal prison watching her empire dissolve, watching everything she had built burn, powerless to stop it. Justice was not death. Death would have been too quick, too merciful, too easy. Justice was systematic destruction. It was the slow understanding that she had lost everything, and there would be no appeal, no escape, no redemption. At the mansion, Aria woke to soft light filtering through curtains she did not remember. Her body was a map of pain, but the worst of it had been managed by medication. She lay very still, trying to remember how she had gotten here, and then it came rushing back. The alley. The fists. The rain. She tried to sit up and gasped. Dr. Ricky appeared in the doorway as if summoned by the sound. Stay down. You have 3 broken ribs and a fractured cheekbone. Your eye will take weeks to heal properly. Emma is safe. She's sleeping upstairs. Giovanni brought her here after they took you into emergency care. She hasn't left your door since. The words hit something in Aria's chest that pain medication couldn't reach. Emma was safe. Emma was upstairs in this fortress, in this place of marble and money and ruthless protection. Giovanni came later, when the afternoon light had turned golden. He looked like he had not slept. There was blood under his fingernails, not his own. He stood in the doorway without entering, studying her the way a man might study something precious that he believed he had already lost. They're gone, he said. His voice was solid, final, like a door closing on a chapter of the world. Both of them. Douglas Hale will never hurt anyone again. Catherine Mercer will spend the rest of her life in prison watching her legacy burn. That network has been dismantled. The women they were holding have been rescued. Aria's vision blurred with tears that came from somewhere deeper than pain. She had spent so long being invisible, being nobody, that she had forgotten what it felt like to matter enough for someone to move mountains. You shouldn't have, she began. I had to. He stepped into the room, pulled a chair beside her bed, and sat down. Because you mattered. Because your daughter mattered. Because sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Rain began to fall outside, soft and gentle, like the world was finally learning how to be kind. 1 week had passed since the night everything changed. Aria woke to soft light filtering through curtains she did not recognize, spilling across sheets that felt like clouds against her healing skin. Her face still ached, the bruises on her cheekbone had faded from purple to yellow-green, like autumn leaves pressed against her bones. Dr. Ricky had visited that morning, pressing his fingers gently along her ribs, nodding with approval. The fractures were knitting. The swelling in her eye had receded enough that she could see clearly from both sides now. Emma lay curled against her pillow, 7-year-old chest rising and falling with the peaceful rhythm of a child who had finally learned what safety felt like. Aria pulled on the robe someone had left on the chair, soft grey cashmere worth more than everything she had owned before, and made her way down the marble hallway. Giovanni's mansion was quiet at 10:07 in the morning. Quiet in a way that suggested power, as if even the air itself knew better than to make noise without permission. She found him in his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seattle's skyline, the city spreading below like something he owned, which perhaps he did. Giovanni sat behind a desk of dark mahogany, surrounded by papers and folders, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to expose the silver watch that cost more than her mother's entire house. He did not look up immediately. When he finally did, his dark eyes registered her presence like a shift in pressure. "You should be resting," he said. "I need to talk to you." Aria's voice still trembled sometimes, like a bird learning to use its wings after weeks in a cage. "You called them." "The federal agents. You destroyed everything they built." Giovanni set down his pen with deliberate care. "I made a phone call. The FBI did their job." "No." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the floor. "You made more than a phone call. You destroyed Douglas Hale. You destroyed Catherine Mercer's entire empire. I know what you did." He rose from his chair with the slow grace of a man accustomed to commanding rooms simply by standing. "You were bleeding on my kitchen floor. That was the only phone call that mattered." "Giovanni." "You saved Sophia," he said quietly, cutting her off. His voice was like a closed door. "My wife. You returned her prayer card to me when you could have taken $300 from my wallet instead. We are even." But his eyes betrayed him. They burned with something he would not speak aloud. Aria's breath caught. "How did you?" "Security footage." He moved to the window, and she recognized this as an act of mercy. He was giving her space to compose herself, which meant he understood what his words had done to her. "I had cameras installed on that building 2 years ago when Hale started his operation there. I did not know what I was looking for. Until I found you." From a drawer in his desk, Giovanni withdrew a card no larger than his palm. The edges were worn soft, the image faded, a saint in gold leaf, a prayer printed in Italian beneath. He held it between his fingers like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I watched you take my wallet," he continued. His voice was steady, but there was a fracture running through it, like ice beginning to crack. "You opened it. You saw the cash. And then you put it back." He paused. "You took only this. Because you thought it was worthless to everyone but you." Aria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. It reminded me of my grandmother. I didn't know. That is exactly why you took it." He pressed the card into her palm, and his fingers stayed there a moment longer than necessary. "This was my wife's. She carried it every day until the cancer took her. I have been looking for this card for 2 years. I thought it was lost." His dark gaze held hers. "And then you found it. Not because you were looking, but because you were kind when kindness would cost you everything." Aria looked down at the prayer card in her hand. The saint's face was serene, unmoved by the storms of the world. She thought of her own mother's card, packed away in a box somewhere in a storage unit she could no longer afford to pay for. She thought of all the small sacred things that mattered only to the people who loved them. "You asked me why I helped you," Giovanni said. He had returned to the window, silhouetted against the city lights. "You asked what possible reason a man like me could have for saving someone like you. And I told you we were even. But that was not the truth." Aria waited. The silence stretched like a held breath. "When I found you bleeding in my home, I realized I had spent 5 years building walls so high and so thick that nothing could reach me. Nothing human, anyway." He turned to face her. "And then you walked through every one of them without even trying. You did not know who I was. You did not ask for anything. You were simply there, broken and bleeding and still reaching for your daughter. And I could not turn away. The room was so quiet she could hear the clock on the wall, each second a small percussion of time passing. Your landlord has been charged with fraud, Giovanni continued, his tone shifting to something more practical. The eviction notice was fabricated. Your rent is current. Emma's school fees for the next 4 years are paid. You are not going anywhere unless you choose to. Aria's knees weakened. $35,000. The amount that had haunted her every waking moment, the mathematical impossibility that had felt like a countdown to losing everything. He had erased it like it had never existed. Why would you do this? She whispered. Because you are worth it, he said simply. Stay here as long as you need. Work for me or do not. Build something of your own. But you and Emma are safe. That is all that matters to me now. He extended his hand, and in it he held the prayer card again, offering it back to her. She took it, her fingers trembling against his. Outside, the Seattle rain began to fall, not harsh anymore, but gentle, like the world was finally learning how to be kind. 1 year had passed since that morning. Aria Harper stood on a balcony 42 stories above the city, watching October paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The wind was cold, but it no longer felt like a blade. She was wearing a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, her hair pulled back with quiet confidence, her face unmarked by bruises now. Instead, there were only the faint traces of scars that no one else could see unless they knew exactly where to look. Below her, Seattle glowed with evening light. From this height, the city looked like something beautiful and whole. She had learned to see it that way again. The non-profit had grown beyond her wildest imaginings. 12 women had graduated from the program in the first 6 months. 23 in the first year. There were job placement services now, childcare assistants, therapy groups that met 3 times a week in a converted warehouse near Pike Place Market. An anonymous donor had provided the funding. She knew exactly who it was, but they never spoke of it directly. Emma was thriving. 7 years old, reading at a 4th grade level, drawing pictures that filled the walls of her bedroom with colors and impossible animals. She had not had a single nightmare in 8 months. Sometimes Aria caught her humming while she did her homework, and the sound was like proof of something sacred. Footsteps approached on the balcony behind her. She did not turn. She recognized the weight of those footsteps, the particular cadence of his walk. You built something good here, Giovanni said. I had help. She turned to face him. Even in the fading light, she could see the scar that cut from his eye to his cheekbone, the silver threaded through his dark hair, the expensive rings on his fingers. He was still dangerous. He would always be dangerous. But his eyes were softer now, as if something inside him had learned how to rest. He stepped onto the balcony and stood beside her, looking out at the city without speaking. The silence between them had changed over the year. It used to feel like a threat. Now it felt like understanding. I need to tell you something I have carried for a year, he said finally. Her heart accelerated. She waited. When I found you bleeding in my house, I did not save you because it was the right thing to do. I saved you because I could not imagine a world where you did not exist in it. He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of his feelings written plainly across his face. Every day since then, I have watched you rebuild yourself into someone stronger than anyone I have ever known. Saving you was not my job. But loving you became my choice. Aria's breath caught. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the solid reality of him standing there. You think you saved me, she said. But you did not. You gave me the chance to save myself. And that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They stood together on the balcony, the October wind cold around them, but neither one felt it anymore. The city lights began to multiply as dusk deepened into evening, and somewhere in the world below, women who had escaped the darkness were learning how to walk into their own futures. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Not because it saves you completely, but because it reminds you that you are worth saving. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone you love. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever had someone reach out at exactly the right moment when you needed it most? Your story might be the one we tell tomorrow. We wish you good health, joy, and days filled with peace and light. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you in the next story. Goodbye.